Playing if in here before, you probably have seen her very passionately going around serving food and telling everybody about the stories behind the dishes. And next up is Miss Helena, who's also known as my mom. She grew up in a military village herself, so invited her to come up to share some of her experience and stories. And of course, we have our chef Tony. If you've been to Good to Eat, all the many delicious creations, these are her babies. And of course, Henry, Chef Henry, who's responsible for the delicious beef noodle soup you all had today. So let's give him a round of applause. Well, so to start, I know that this is an event that Tony and Angie have been wanting to do for a really long time. So, Angie, I'll pass it to you first. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what is it, the event that you're trying to create, and the vibe that you're hoping people can experience it.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi everyone. So I think here that for most of the guests today, welcome. That you probably have most of you have had Good to Eat dumplings food before, and we just moved to here. That it's really after 5 years of Papa, so it's really a dream come true that we finally have our own brick and mortar restaurant. And one of the most important reasons we really want to have our own restaurant is really that because starting from 4 or 5 years ago, we started to cook the food that we deeply love. That we want to represent the flavor that we miss every day. We want to use the cooking technique and the flavor profile that we want to share with the community. So actually Taiwanese food is really hard to define because actually if you come to think of it, so just like all the food that it's keep being evolving, and in Taiwanese cuisine is even more so. So we often feel that there are a lot of unique flavor, unique dish that so while we love to serve good food with all of our friends, but what really have been driven us is really the stories behind it. Food got created, got invented, got passed by generation for a reason. And usually whatever the reason is all because of love and the intent of sharing. So learning the stories behind the food is really, you can see that where the food coming from, and how it got created, and why you taste the food today. And that's just, we just love all of those stories and the flavors all together. So we have been so exciting that so our very first food and culture event is beef noodle soup and the dumpling, because actually in Taiwan, there is one kind of the specialty store. It's always 牛肉面水饺. So 牛肉面 is the beef noodle soup, 水饺 is the dumpling. So so really one kind of the specialty store selling those food, and there's a reason for that. And we really want to share that because we started making dumpling. We started our business as making dumplings, so we really want to share these stories with you.
Yeah, so as Angie was saying about evolving, one of the problems I mentioned in the event was that people didn't actually eat beef noodle soup before 1950s. It was just not a thing that people ate. Yet today we recognize it as like Taiwan's national dish. So Henry, I'm gonna pass it off to you. Tell us about what happened. How did that become something that we all know about today?
So, Taiwanese beef noodle soup is known, if it's working, to be the national dish of Taiwan. It's really popular today, and I don't know at what point it started, but yes, not until the 50s did it evolve or originate. And I knew some of the story behind it. I was born in Taiwan, but I grew up in the States, so for me it was always, it's not something we had at home, but whenever we went to Taiwan, it was always these beef noodle soup shops, and and they're all anyway. So the way the history behind it a little bit is that it's a Sichuanese flavor profile, and we'll probably talk about this at some point, and related to the military villages and kind of why this convergence of all these different Chinese cultural influences have come from all over China into a very small place we know as Taiwan. And but it does have a Sichuanese flavor profile, which means Sichuan peppercorn, which is the ma, which is the kind of numbing spice, and then chili, which is the la, which is the spicy aspect. And so, and I'm a blabber, sorry. So for me, the soup was always kind of like, oh, this is from mainland China, and oh, this is a Sichuanese thing. And then so over the years, and I've been making it now probably for 10 years or so, and kind of developing it and getting it to where it is now. And then hearing all these stories about how, right, no one was eating beef in China unless it was actually halal. So there are Western halal Muslim Chinese that do have beef noodle soup restaurants in Taiwan, because like everybody, so this is kind of geopolitical, sorry, I'm jumping around. But in Taiwan in 1949, and the reason that we're talking about this, does everyone know about 1949 or what happened? And kind of, I can give a little quick history lesson on this. But when Chiang Kai-shek was fleeing mainland China from the communists, with him came people from every province of China. So soldiers, chefs, politicians. So there's representation on the food front in this tiny island from all parts of China. So I always just conflated that with being, this is Sichuanese. But the fact is, in Sichuan province, no one was eating beef. And in Taiwan, people were not really eating beef. But Taiwan also, we were a part of Japan from 1898 till 1945. And the Japanese also right around 1920s and 30s at the end of the Edo period and the Meiji Restoration and kind of opening up. The Japanese also were not eating land animals much. And then with the Western influence, the Japanese started eating beef. And this is kind of a funny story, but you all know sukiyaki? So sukiyaki is a Japanese way of eating meat, and suki is spade, so it's like a tool or implement. Like eating land animals is kind of dirty, so people would cook meat out in the barn. So in any case, Taiwan being a part of Japan, I didn't know this till recently, Taiwan actually housed some meat packing plants in the 30s to start teaching people how to eat meat. So in any case, people were poor, people didn't have access to it either. So not until the after World War II and Taiwan going back to China, but then 3 years later, separating again because of the communists. Anyway, what happened was we were allied with the US military and anti-communism. So what happened was all of a sudden we had an influx of affordable beef and for the first time flour, so wheat flour. So prior to this time, even though people were coming from all parts of China, including the north, where dumplings and noodles and that kind of stuff came from, people still didn't have access to it. People were eating rice. So this soup, and we'll talk about this more in a bit, but is kind of a confluence of all of these kind of situations and people just making do with what they have and creating this dish. So national dish of Taiwan and kind of all these cultures coming together in this modern era. So that's the quick intro.
Cool. Well, this guy is a wealth of knowledge, so we're gonna circle back to him at some point, I'm sure. But so Henry mentioned about how at the time it was post-war, U.S. was in their interest to support Taiwan, and they were giving a lot of food in terms of aid. So I'm gonna pass over to Mom. So I know there was a time when she grew up, she has some personal experience from the aid that we received from U.S. and the different things that the families were doing. Maybe you can share some memories
Okay.
with us.
Hi, everyone. Actually, I came from Southern California because Sean told me, he said, oh, they have an event. And he always share about the passion of the, Angie and Tony. So I said, okay. And because I live in the military village. Okay. I remember when I was young, when that time I was 12, I think that time in the military was hard. So we didn't really have too much food. And I remember, maybe in China, people will eat a duck soup, and that's my dad created. He said, okay, we need a nutrient. So he buy the pork, the bone, the big bone, and like a green sprout, we say 绿豆芽, the yellow sprout, 黄豆芽. So the tongue is kind of like a ya. So then he cooked and with the bone, and he made the soup and with the tofu. So every time we eat that, he said, oh, this is a duck soup. 是黄豆芽, 豆芽, it's a 鸭子汤, 这样. Okay. And I also remember when I was around like a 12, was flooding, and everywhere the water is kind of like deep. And then we didn't have a bathtub that time, so we used a big bucket, the metal one. So then we were little, so we're sitting in the bucket. We think that's kind of like a boat. As Henry mentioned before, yeah, the United States support us with some military ration. So we had the flour, and we had the butter in the can, and some canned food. So when we were kids, so we were happy to get the food. And I also remember when I lived in the military, sometimes the neighbor is more, they don't live in the military, so they are more like Taiwanese, they speak Taiwanese. And then they will carry some food, like a yam or vegetable, to come to the village. And kind of like they trade with us. I don't know, for some reason, they needed salt that time. And first, United States, the government support us. And then later on, Taiwan, the government, they had a system. They say the children, the age, and then how much rice they can gather, how much flour they can gather each month, and how much the salt we can get based on the age. And so we try to save the salt so we can switch the food with the neighbor. They don't live in the military. Yeah. So, and also one thing, we live in the military because all people came from different province. So everybody they make a different kind of food. And so they can, we share the food. So that's why the food is kind of more like diverse, and then mix, change the way, maybe not exactly like how they eat in China. Thank you.
And to add a little bit to what my mom was saying, so you've seen in some of the pictures, these quarters in the military village is very small. So they don't really have room to grow their own vegetables, which is why they would be trading salt with folks who were already living in Taiwan. And also because of the quarters really close, it is also easier. I've heard stories where people don't really lock the front door. If the neighbor needs help, people just hop over. My dad was telling me how a neighbor watched a kid for like a couple days, or someone's making some kind of stew for like the block, and so just don't cook like dinner Thursday. It's on us. Come over, and then maybe because they got paid, they're able to buy some meat, for example. So I remember the close proximity led to a lot of these kind of a tighter interaction.
But that time, actually, because everybody had a hard time, so I think people try to help each other. Yeah, they try to share the food or they help each other to watch the kids.
Cool. Thanks, Mom. Well, so I'm going to switch back a little bit to talk about the broader picture of the food, because today we have shui jiao and beef noodle soup. Those are two very kind of iconic dishes that came through the 1950s when people came from China. But there are even more food in the Juancun Cai, in the military village. So maybe I can leave it up for Angie and Tony if you folks want to talk about some other Juancun Cai that we didn't see today but are also a big part of the Taiwanese cuisine.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting to me that so like my family is a very typical half of the so my grandpa's side that he followed Chiang Kai-shek from China to Taiwan, and my mother's side is Taiwanese. So I'm like very typical that I grew up have like mixing culture influences. And so I remember when I was young that when I was really little that my grandpa always mentioned to me that he stayed at home and he cooked for me, and he said that so let me show you this dish, and he cooked something and he said this is something he enjoyed from his childhood. And also, sometimes he cooks things for me and saying that, when I was young in military, that so I ran into a colleague and he is from another province, and so so I thought it's so delicious. So today I recreate this for you. So I growing up that I feel that so today I'm having authentic Dongbei Cai, so the Dongbei cuisine, so the northeast part of the China, and so this dish is authentic cuisine from this province. But funny thing is that after I grew up and after I start to travel, I start to learn more about the food. So let's just take the Taiwanese beef noodle soup for example. There are so many Taiwanese beef noodle soup store restaurant in Taiwan, and growing up we were told those are authentic Sichuan beef noodle soup. And then so just like Henry mentioned before that so we grew up, and after we grew up I found actually there's no such a thing in Sichuan, but we grew up all feel like so those are like very authentic Sichuan beef noodle soup. One day we probably want to go to Sichuan to enjoy it. And then we just figure out, no, it's actually invented in Taiwan. And actually the story is that people from Sichuan that they miss their one kind of the sauce called douban jiang. So it's one how to say douban jiang in English?
Chili.
Broad bean paste,
Yeah.
fava bean, fermented fava bean.
Fermented fava bean paste. Thank you. So they miss that sauce so much, and they are not able to access it, and not even close. So they just use the local ingredient to create that sauce. So that sauce become the most important basic flavor, basic ingredient flavor in the broth. That is really what make the Taiwanese beef noodle soup different. So like this is one classic example. And growing up so we have different kind of like all kind of thing like xiaolongbao. Shanghai has a lot of great this type of the dim sum, but apparently Taiwan has their own version. So there are so many dishes like this, and what has been fascinating me the most is really that. So after I grew up, I suddenly realized that so people they left where they born and raised, and they land in a new land, and And so when my grandpa said that this is the food I had in my childhood, when my grandpa said this is authentic Hunan cuisine that I learned from my colleague, that even my grandpa has no way to figure out that whether this is really authentic or not. So actually the only authentic thing is really from here, the heart, that it is so delicious. So he remembered it and he recreated based on his memory, and he want to cook delicious food for his granddaughter, me. Oh, I feel emotional. So I feel this is the beautiful thing about immigrant food, that actually food keep evolving and the generation of the love. So today, if you go to Taiwan, so actually there are so many dishes that invented or reinvented by Taiwanese that you are not going to find from China. So yeah, so that's the fun part of it.
Yeah, so speaking of reinventing as a result of immigration, I feel a lot of what we do at Good to Eat is really the same. Right now we're immigrating again from Taiwan to US. So maybe and Tony, you can share with us some of your thoughts behind that and how that influences what you do at Great to Eat. Good to Eat. Great to Eat.
Great to eat. Good name. Okay, maybe next one. Okay, yeah. I think I want to share a little bit like from my family, because I make a dumpling, so the beef noodle soup and the dumpling is always good friends, because in the Taiwan you can see this cup dish all together. So the same, I think Taiwan, I don't know, my family is same. We have halfway, my grandma is Taiwanese. So grandpa is the white Shen from China. So I can remember he like he make food, and my grandma make food is totally different. So they're always fighting every day. But it's really good because my grandpa said that's more delicious, but my grandma said that was more delicious. Okay, so my grandpa, he loved making today everyone eat the lu wei, but he lu anything, any kind of beef, pork, veggie, mushroom, everything he make that. But usually we only can eat the lu wei in the New Year. Then he will make all day and all house all the lu wei flavor. So I always really remember that. And for sure, so he showed us how to make the dumpling, use the handmade for the dough. But grandpa, the dough always more doughy, it's more thick. But my grandma loved more thinner and more flavor in the filling. So for sure, I love that way. So I learned from my grandma. So my dumpling always very care about how to use the ingredient and put all together and make it more delicious. And the dough is not like a chew doughy, more thinner, just carry the filling like that. So this is how I remember for the different from different way. Then in the one home, then we can make it all the different kind of food. So for when I moved to here, I think this year is my 6 or 5 years now. And beginning, I just really miss, the same. When I came here, so say I miss my family food, I miss Taiwanese street food, night market food, but I cannot find that. So the same, all the story, I just start here and start to create my food, because from my memory, because I miss my grandpa the way, I miss my grandma 水饺, I miss the 巷口的 牛肉面 beef noodle soup same. So try to making the food here, and for sure the same heart, how I can share this flavor to everyone. Shares my memory, shares my taste, shares the Taiwanese cuisine. So this is how we start this great to eat, then to share more great food to everyone. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. I see we just on the spot made up when we open a second restaurant, you'll be called Great to Eat. But going on talking about the changing the ingredients as people move to a new place. I know Henry, as you're making the beef noodle soup this time, you had some experience and findings about sourcing ingredients and all that fun stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I think similar to Tony, moving to the States, when I started really cooking Taiwanese food when I moved to Ecuador maybe 15 years ago, and I've been here now 10 years, and there were very few Asians in Quito, and so I really had to learn how to make everything from scratch, and that's where I started doing things. And I started with dumplings, and then things like beef noodle soup, and I just kind of interject about some cultural things because we've been talking about the Weisenren, like Chinese versus Taiwanese. But then we were talking about this earlier that Taiwan actually has this Aboriginal population, so ethnically we're all Chinese mostly, but maybe 90% or 85% had come just over successive waves over. But they happen to come from two specific provinces just in the south. And so, but it's funny because when I started making the things that I started to make, like dumplings and this and that, my mother would go, "Why are you making that? That's Chinese food. We don't eat that kind of stuff." Like we didn't grow up eating dumplings. We didn't have dumplings till we were older, or noodles and this kind of stuff. But for me, it's, the convergence of these things is interesting, and I think creates something totally new. And it's food, but it's also identity, and it's all this other stuff. And then coming to California, I moved in food. My day job is I work at a tofu company, and then I used to do food tours, and I used to teach dumpling making classes and do one Taiwanese pop-up a year. But like all food-focused Bay Area people, I'm sure we can get really obsessive about ingredients and about where things come from. So for me, making this beef noodle soup, it's just been, these are the ranches I've visited or toured, and then finding these certain ingredients kind of started to inform, because there are a few different varieties of beef noodle soup in Taiwan, and I just kind of focused on this one. And part of the soup, one of the tomatoes I use is from Radical Family Farms, which is, the farmers are here today, and we all kind of met around the same time. Good to Eat Dumplings, me, Radical Family Farms, and this is not related to the beef, but it's another ingredient story. But we were talking about cabbage earlier, and Tony brought up earlier that she really missed Taiwanese cabbage, and then it just reminded me of my mom when she came to visit me in Ecuador, and she met this other Taiwanese woman there and was crying and eating her food and going, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she was like, Taiwan cabbage. And she was like, "It's so light and crisp and sweet," and it's like, oh, it's not like this American cabbage, which looks similar. Is anyone here familiar with Taiwan cabbage? So, regular Western cabbage is white and round and really dense. Taiwan cabbage looks similar, but it's squat and flat, and when you cut it open, it's really light and airy, and it really chars nicely. And when I first started learning dumpling making, for example, I was always following, because I don't read Chinese, Western, recipes, and it was always talking about Napa cabbage. And salt the Napa cabbage, drain it, and then when I went to Taiwan, they were like, "How do you make your dumplings, Henry?" And I was like, "Then I do this to the cabbage," and they were like, "No, you can't use that kind of cabbage." They were like, "What are you doing? We don't use that kind of cabbage." And I was like, okay. Anyway, so that's how I met Leslie and Sarah here, because they posted something about cabbage, and I, like any Bay Area person, I'm looking for clean ingredients. So the beef noodle soup, for example, today that you had is all local, regeneratively pastured and grass-fed beef, the bones, and then the one difficult thing, and I hope everyone ate their tendon. It's so hard to source clean tendon, and there's like 2 ranches that will.
We really like to our taste because, well, traditionally it's used Napa cabbage, and the Napa cabbage has one kind of the sweetness. It's really, really good. But for some reason in Taiwan, because Taiwan that compared to north and east of China, so it's very south. So it's hot, humid. So it's actually not great for Napa cabbage. And we happen to have that Taiwanese varietal of the cabbage. And Taiwan has a very interesting that, so we are an island, but we have very, very high mountain. And so those Taiwanese varietal of the cabbage, usually they grow on high mountain. So it's, so basically compared to our selection of like between Napa cabbage and other veggie and the Taiwanese cabbage, apparently the Taiwanese cabbage growing up from the mountain, that is really top notch of the top notch. So Taiwanese start to and also it's a lot too. So it has become the basic veggie ingredient for Taiwanese dumplings. So yeah, and we also love the dumpling that incorporate with Napa cabbage, but to represent Taiwanese flavor of the dumpling is that has to be cabbage. That if it's Napa cabbage, then no.
Sounds good. So actually, I was checking the time. I think we're about where we normally would cut off for the panel, but I like the fact that there was people asking questions. So I was thinking, actually, before I do that, I do want to pass it to Henry to mention about the dessert that you all had today.
Has everyone here had that kind of thing before? No. Or is this the first time for folks?
First time for me.
And so we've been talking beyond this panel about all these different identity things, or kind of what defines Taiwan, or when does it become Taiwanese, or what does that even mean, or but one of the things tonight that you ate, and when we were making it just now to serve to you, we were both like, oh my god, I just want to be at a night market in Taiwan. And one, it's really hot there, so it's great to eat that kind of thing. But it's actually, and I have to plug this business because they sent it to us for free. But that is just the pectin of a climbing fig. And it's the seeds, which are here. And this business, it's called Yunhai Shop, Yunhai Shop. And it's these young Taiwanese women in New York who are bringing in small batch makers of soy sauce, sesame oil, ingredients, and they just opened a brick and mortar, but it was all during the pandemic. And so it's really hard to find this ingredient, and it's kind of expensive. But and what Angie was saying, it's also part of the climate of Taiwan that allows for it to grow. So apparently it only grows in Taiwan in the mountains, high mountains, and it's a kind of fig, and it climbs, and it's just the seeds, and we all just rubbed out the pectin in a pantyhose, essentially, liner, and it's just a really classic, and this is truly the Taiwanese thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
Nice. I like that we come all the way back and wrapped it up, going back to a Taiwanese only plant, leading to a Taiwanese only dish. So maybe I'll just give everyone panel if there's any last thing you would like to add. If not, I'm thinking we can maybe open things up, or we can do something more casual. We invite everyone to come up and ask us any questions, any of us, whether it's about the military village experience or about the particular food we had. And also remember to share with us a particular dish or food that reminds you of your family history on your way out, and check out what everyone else has bring. So I leave it at the panel, see if there's any last comment you would like to squeeze in before we go break for Q&A.
I just want to thank for everyone coming down. That we often feel that, especially for the past 4 years, that we have been cooking food that not common here. That so it's really that everyone showing up today. That it is really that you have this you are open mind and to explore different flavor and learn about different story and the history. That we firmly believe that through food that is the ultimate in inclusiveness, and that's the most beautiful thing that we have been enjoying from all of you for the past 4 years. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Anyone else would like to share anything in particular?
It's just interesting. I don't know. I mean, I grew up, my family moved here in the early 70s, and then, I don't know, I'm generalizing, but I feel like a lot of East Asian immigrants tend to look forward and never talk about history or family history and all this kind of stuff. So it's just been really nice this last several years. Because growing up, it was always like, are you Taiwanese or Chinese? And not understanding all the geopolitical stuff, and then not understanding all of what that meant. And then I think maybe because there was a first generation and immigrant, but first generation that's growing up now in this country, that's kind of, if you've been reading about Taiwanese food out in the New York Times and KQED and all that kind of stuff, it's just interesting to see it all kind of coming out now. And I don't feel like people know how to talk about it. Not that I'm saying we know how to talk about it, but because there's so many nuances and there's so many confusion and convergences of cultures. And so it is another regional Chinese cuisine, but it's also really new, and it's being invented or reinvented also by all these first generation Taiwanese immigrants. So when you're out there eating stuff, just keep all that in mind. But thank you.
All right. So let's hear it for all the panelists today.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming out, and feel free to hang out.